So, how did I become Jay the Soul Coach? My backstory. Everyone's got a backstory, and that is one of the, if not the most special part of doing what I do is the fact that I get to sit down and listen to people's stories, which is always a wonderful and learning experience. Because these days, unfortunately, a lot of people don't listen to people. We're too busy waiting to see what text comes up or what WhatsApp message comes up on the phone next. So we're very rarely present. I do believe the art of good conversation, which is based on really listening to someone, is becoming a thing of the past. So, my backstory. I grew up in a very religious driven household. Christianity, the type of Christianity, because there's many forms of Christianity, was born again Christian, is like the label. And it it was driven mainly by my dad. My dad was very much a authoritarian figure. It was first 7 to 10 years of my life. He was my hero. He was just a wonderful dad, kind, laughy, jokey, like lots, just really, really great dad. Unfortunately, he had a change of job and he became a prison officer. And there's an irony to that, which you'll learn in a little while. Became a prison officer and he changed him. And my youth was very much driven by the Bible. Like my dad was a dad of the Bible. That was the sort of set of rules for him to be a good father was what he took from that book. Now, my disclaimer, I should have said this at the start. I've got nothing against people that are religious. That's fine. Uh, your choice, and that's the whole beautiful thing about life is you're supposed to always have a choice because you do always have a choice. Unfortunately, though, it was due to indirectly through the church that I grew up going to every single Sunday that the person that my abuser who groomed me, it was through that church that I got abused. So I didn't tell anyone about that situation, didn't tell my mum and dad, and obviously being a small child, not in any way equipped to process or deal with that type of trauma. Sorry, I've got itchy nose. Typical, every time I go on camera that happens. That created a very difficult what went on into my teenage years because obviously there was a lot of trauma, a lot of confusion. The mind is a very dark place, and what I found was that in hindsight, there was a lot of decisions I made that was based on the you right, baby? Just being just come on, you can do a bit better than that. The deal was she has to finish all of her breakfast this morning. You can do a little bit better than that. A lot of my decisions were based on the confusion and trauma of what happened to me when I was younger. So I went off the rails a bit through my teenage years. And what was interesting, the way I was groomed was through alcohol. Now, obviously, at a young age, a small boy, you are not tolerant to alcohol at all. So the fact that and what would happen, I don't remember the extent. There's certain things I do absolutely remember from the abuse. Certain things I don't, and I don't know the extent because I used to black out. So I'd remember as a youngster feeling, oh, this is a funny feeling, quite, jovial feeling. And then all of a sudden, there was a cut-off point where I genuinely do not remember anything, still to this day. Now, it was interesting, fast forwarding into these teenage years, where that, I grew up in a very working class, very, my my background is from a very poor part of East London, which I'm very proud of because I may have had a bad experience, that one experience. However, as a kid, my upbringing, it was a boiling pot of different cultures. So my best friends were Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, African, Jamaican. So it was a wonderful upbringing. It from that perspective, and salute. and basically going back to sort of them teenage years, going out with my friends as you do as kids, sort of 14, 15, you start finding a local off license that will serve kids alcohol. So what was interesting is I used to drink even at that young age, like obviously years later from when the abuse happened. I would then start that normal part. I say normal, but it was normal in regards to my upbringing, whereby all my friends, we all got sort of drinking alcohol at the same time, smoking cannabis at the same time. And I used to remember getting to the point where I would drink, 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 and again it would cut off. So that cut off switch, that detachment, which I later found out in life is quite common with people that go through abuse. There's a sort of detachment switch where you switch off to leave, if you like, while it's going on. And mine was alcohol, not by choice initially, but later on in life, in these years, was by very much by choice. So got involved in drugs, both using and selling. And actually, when I was 20, no, when I was 18, I got involved in, it was a house party, got involved in a fight. My best friend at that point was a mixed race lad, and we was at a party, and some racist skinhead lads turned up and they attacked my friend. I tried to defend him. We got beaten up, and then we left, but we came back. We came back to the party with another friend to, which is something I say I regret. I don't regret because I genuinely don't regret anything now because these are all very much lessons. It was a bad decision, yes, definitely. We went back to the party, and to cut a very long story short, I ended up getting a 5 year prison sentence for something that my friend did. Now, in England, in London especially, there's a thing called a grass or a snitch. You can't be a snitch. So, although I knew I didn't do it, my friend did it, of course, you don't snitch. So, I ended up getting first time I was really in trouble with the police, I ended up getting a 5 year prison sentence. And I spent about 3 years in prison, which was such a big learning curve for me. That's another conversation. However, that what that did do in prison was it started a new thirst for knowledge. I scraped through school because I was thankfully naturally intelligent enough to get through what I needed to get through school, but there was no interest. When I went to prison, I became interested. You have a lot of time on your hands. Started reading, started studying, and really had, for the first time in my life, some real alone time with me. Because I was only, when I actually went to prison, I was 21. Because although the incident happened when I was 18, I actually, because it wasn't me that did it, I actually ran to Ireland with my best friend because I didn't want to tell on him, but at the same time, I didn't want to stick around at that point to get the blame. So we actually ran to Ireland, which is why I ended up going to prison when I came back from Ireland at 21 years old. As I said, prison experience, it's a long story, but it was definitely necessary for me at that point in my life. Come out of prison, I started working as I became a personal trainer. I studied, became a personal trainer whilst I was in prison. I was always into sports. I played quite high level of football. And coming out of prison, I was still very much lost. I came out when I went in 2002. I came out 2005. So I was 24 years old. I was when I left prison, and I realized I thought I was a big man. I was still a kid, still very much a broken child that hadn't processed any of the traumas that really need to be processed. So anyway, I start working. Thing is with prison, and again, as I said, I became quite OCD with learning. Anything I could learn, I would pick up and really try and go knee deep into. And one of the things is, as a young man going in at 21, for the first time in his life, being surrounded by career criminals, I started learning about crime. And when I came out of prison, I met some fantastic human beings in prison, and I met some not so fantastic human beings in prison. However, like I said, I met some really good people in prison that I stayed friends with. And uh, again, there's so many long stories here that I'm going to cut short. But one of them, which is quite funny, is when I came out of prison, I got parole. So I was because I was a first-time offender. I actually got parole from prison, and I ended up. There was a time in the UK where there was a franchise of gyms called Fitness First. They were everywhere, and I actually worked my way up to managing the one in the centre of London, right in the middle of London. If you've been to London, there's a place called Tooley Street, which is in between London Bridge and Tower Bridge. It's where the London Dungeons and everything is. It's a real main attraction. Well, there's a big corporate fitness. There was a big corporate fitness first in that area, and I started managing that gym. What was quite funny was my friends from prison that had mobile phones in prison would phone me from prison and say, Jay, can you give me a job for my parole? So I would be giving. And in this particular fitness first, it was all the big C-suite, CEOs, CTOs, CFOs of some of the biggest banks and corporate companies, financial companies within not just the UK, within the world, and they'd be getting trained by me and my friends, which were all basically either on parole or ex convicts. It's the irony, right? And that was, by the way, the irony when I said my dad became a prison officer, and I ended up going to prison. And again, just one more thing to backdate that story. The first prison I went to was Pentonville, which is in North London, and my dad and three of my uncles, so four of my family members, had all been prison officers in that prison. Thank God they was no longer in that prison when I went in there. So anyway, I'm out of prison now. I'm working in the gym. I meet my what is a beautiful, beautiful young lady from Iran, which is now 16 years later my wife and mother of my three children. So whilst in prison, as I said, had a little bit of an education on crime. So when I came out of prison, although I was working legally, I was still doing, due to this new education I'd learned, and I'm not proud of this, this is just me being honest. I got involved in a big gang who were involved in drugs. So I started working on the side with these people whilst managing the gym in central London. And what happened was things came on top. And by that, when I say things came on top, the part of the gang were found and were arrested by the police. So I'd not long met my wife at that, my girlfriend, who's now my wife at that point, and that was quite an interesting conversation because after not many weeks of knowing her, I said to her, "I need to leave." Why? So you know, just need to get out of London, fed up with London, blah 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 blah, and and I didn't expect for a second for her to come with me. I said, look, I totally appreciate if you don't want to come, but of course she being her the best human being I've ever met, she said that she wants to come with me. So she said, where are you going? And I hadn't got that far, so I was like, somewhere hot. And she said, I've got an uncle that lives in Greece. So we left the UK pretty much within a few days. I scraped the cash that I had around me, and we packed everything up in two huge bags and we shot off to Greece. And she ended up phoning her uncle, God rest his soul, Doyi, and we stayed with them for a little while, and we started building a life in Greece. What was quite funny when I was in Greece is, for some reason, ignorant English. I thought people would speak English. What a plonker I am. And I thought I'd just be able to start personal training out there in Greece. That didn't work out. So it was really interesting because the money was running low. Everything was sort of going to pot out there. I loved Greece. I loved just being in the sunshine. Living in London, England, my whole life. To move to the sunshine was just wow. It was wonderful. And we was literally about to give it all up, and a job came up in the local English paper out there, online paper, and it was for a travel agency to sell holidays. Never done that before. However, I went for the job interview, went really well. I took to it like a duck to water. And again, another very long story short, I ended up opening my own travel agency. I started up my own business out there in Greece. Now, my wife fell pregnant with our first boy, beautiful boy Leo, and I mean, that is when I really learned what to fall in love is all about. It was just, I mean, I always wanted to be a dad. I realized that's one of the first things I've ever manifested. I always said from a young age, I said, and I don't know why, I said I want to be a dad by the time I'm 30. And of course, at 30 years old, I became a father. Now, what was interesting is it brought back a lot of memories from what had happened to me, because the mind is the egoic mind, which is pillar one of my four pillars, which we'll talk about when we meet. The egoic mind is horrific, it's horrible, and we've all got massive egos. You've got massive ego, so have I. That's a fact. Don't judge yourself, you have. And if in your mind you just went, I haven't got an ego, that's what I'm talking about. Them voices in your mind. We've all got them. And I started thinking, oh, what if that happened to Leo and he did what I did, which is not tell my mum and dad. And it was devastating and it brought up a lot of dark, horrible, graphic thoughts. I'm not going to lie, it's horrific, some of the stuff that I used to think. However, again, not dealing with it. Still, at this stage, my wife doesn't know. Still, no one knows what happened to me. So this is something still I'm very much in a fight myself. Anyway, fast forward a couple of years, we have our second little boy, Chair. And again, just the love is amazing. Unfortunately, Chair passed. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. That was worse than anything that happened to me physically, was when we lost Chair. And I, at that point, as always, my coping mechanism was to run. So I packed up the business in Greece. My wife didn't want to leave Greece. I said, I can't stay here. So we went back to England. We ended up living there for 9 years. And for the first 7 of those 9 years, is it 9 years? Maybe not as many as that, but not really relevant. My point is, we went back to England. So I've still not dealt with what happened to me as a kid. I didn't know what grief was, because I hadn't grieved me. And grief is such an important process. I've learned now. It took me a long time to learn it. However, now I know how important grief is. And anyway, so run back to England, still not dealt with either the big traumas in my life, what happened to me, losing Chair. And what took my attention off of this, and this is really where Jay the Soul Coach, although that wasn't the name back then, really started developing, was my uncle, who was my absolute hero in life, because I'd become estranged to my dad for many years. So my role model as a male, just as a male, actually as a human being, was my uncle Laurie, God rest his soul. Just a beautiful, kind, loving, just wonderful, warmth. He was warm. He was home, and he got sick with cancer. And it was the first time. Like, Laurie was just always, for me, strong. He was infallible. I'd never seen him vulnerable. And when he got sick, it was a real blow to me. And what happened was, he reached out to me and asked me, after mainstream medicine he tried didn't work, which was a real shock to him, because my uncle, well, as I said, we grew up in a very working class East London background. We're called, the way I talk, although I'm really trying not to talk so much slangy, is Cockney. We're Cockneys. We're West Ham fans. So we're sorry, people, my nose, tingly nose. So anyway, my uncle. My point of saying that is, my uncle was very working class, very much system driven. When I say system, it was all about, what the hospital, what the doctor said. That they would never do us wrong. So when that failed him, it really shook him. However, being the genius that he was, and being the strength, having the strength that he always has, and still has, he wanted to see what he could do for himself. So we went on the journey, and that's when I started studying the endocannabinoid system. I actually started studying the works of a really, really famous professor. Although I say really famous, he should be the most famous man in the world, in my opinion, because his name is Professor Raphael Mechoulam. And in 1996 or 1997, he officially introduced to the world, with thousands of case studies, the endocannabinoid system, and how, if you ignite this system and you get the system working, your body can't be sick, and it can pretty much repair from anything. So we went on a journey into that and plant medicine. Fast forward, so my uncle, by the way, got after being told he didn't have long left at all, he ended up getting an extra 10 years, good 10 years out of his life before he unfortunately passed. In that time, my thirst for knowledge in regards to self-help knowledge really began, because I realized, as I was at this point now, I'm no longer working in obviously in the fitness world. I'm no longer working in the travel agency world because I'd shut that business up. So in the holiday sector, I'm now working in the social care sector, which was something that was always endeared to me because going back to my childhood, my younger brother Paul, I'm one of four brothers. My younger brother Paul, who was my closest brother in age, only 2 years between us, he had a horrific mental breakdown when we were kids, where he was 13, I was 15. And I remember the first time he got sectioned, it broke me, and I couldn't believe what was going on. It just didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense to me. They was trying to give him pills for his brain. Now my little head was, and my little brain was thinking, this doesn't make sense. It's not a bone. It's not tangible. How can a pill fix his mind? So I ended up studying. I forgot that part of the story. I actually studied mental health medicine and ended up becoming studying mental health and human behaviour, and actually then becoming his registered carer. So trained in mental health as well. Anyway, so all these years later now, working after my uncle Laurie, I start the way the universe works is amazing. It started dropping people onto my lap randomly with cancer. Now, after the journey I'd had with my uncle, it was almost like I always say it's almost like God was pointing a finger down at me, saying, "Right, you know, you need to help these people." So I started working with people with cancer, and it is a really surreal experience because when you work with people that are terminally ill, then if anyone watching this would has been through that experience, what is amazing is the level of truth these people talk, because they now have no longer the egotistical need to worry about crap that we worry about on a daily basis, crap that don't matter. It doesn't matter how we look, what cars we got, what houses we got, where are we on the social class ladder, and all this other nonsense. These people at that stage, and I work and have worked with people from every continent of the world, so completely diverse and different in their backgrounds. And yet, at that stage, what I've learned irrefutably is we share the same natural, humane spirit, which is at that point, you just want to do things that make you happy, not make your husband happy, your wife happy, your kids happy, your friends happy. No, what makes you happy? And it's the simplest things. I want to ride a horse. I want to swim under a waterfall. I want to jump off of a waterfall. And it's like it was interesting because, and I'm not proud of this. I was talking to my wife about this yesterday actually. I actually started begrudging one of the ladies I was working with, and she is, shout out to you, Deborah Young, one of the most beautiful people I've ever met. And all these years later, when I met Debbie and I started working with Debbie, she was told she only had, because she decided herself, it was a form of breast cancer. She didn't want to do the treatment anymore. She said it was just inhumane, it was killing her. She said, if I had carried on the treatment, it would have killed me, even if they're telling me I'm only going to have 6 to 8 weeks left. Anyway, Debbie's still alive. That's sort of almost the best part of a decade later, and she still turns up to my Monday sessions every Monday. She's a beautiful human being, and she taught me so much. Because as I was working with Debbie, I started begrudging how happy she was. I'm not proud of this, it's just me being honest. Because I wasn't happy in me because of all the traumas and stuff that I knew I was holding inside. Yet Debbie was, at the end of her tether, she looked, when I started working with Debbie, she looked beaten, like all her face because of the chemo effects and radiotherapy effects. Her skin had gone yellow, her face was gaunt, most of her hair was gone. She now is as beautiful as ever. Everything's reflourished. But anyway, I was really, yeah, begrudgeful. I was thinking, I didn't say this to her. I was thinking, how can you be so happy? And because I wasn't. And she taught me so much. And at that point, I hit an all time low because I was working with her and giving her all of my good energy, all of my good energy. And then when I'd come home around my wife and my kids, oh, by at this stage, I've had my wonderful little girl, Aaliyah, by the way, who was the little girl who was showing me a cereal to see if she'd eaten enough. I was drained of all the good energy. I'd never been trained officially in medicine. I'd done it all myself. So I now have a newfound respect for doctors. When people say, oh, doctors are so cold, no, they just have to learn to switch off and cut off because it is emotionally draining. I know from my experience, I took on, because I'm an empath as well, I didn't know the balance, and everything in life is about balance. I took on the pain and the energy of the people that I was working with and their family members, their children or their parents. I've worked with both kids and their parents, and then I've worked with kids who've been sick and their parents, and parents with their kids or their grandkids. So I hit an all-time low. I was having a full-on mental breakdown. I was losing my wife and my kids, and at that point, the universe sent in an angel who, really interestingly enough, this angel used to work for me, 7 years younger than me, used to work for me in that central London Fitness First gym when he first qualified as a personal trainer. He came back into my life all of these years later, and he'd become a coach. And I really struggled. My ego massively struggled with this young man at that point, because he came back into my life. He'd become a coach, and I didn't know what he was. He told me what he was, but I'd no interest really. Again, I was very ignorant, very in my, oh, I'm Jay, I'm the guy that helps people with cancer. What do you do? Oh, yeah. Again, all ego, ego. In fact, I used to say, oh yeah, I help people heal from cancer. No, I don't. I only help people by sharing information for them then to heal or help themselves. I don't teach anyone anything. I can't teach anyone anything. I can share. That's what I do. It's very much an equilibrium, because I'm still as imperfectly perfect as anybody else. I'm still as flawed. I'm still, every day's a battle. And it should be, because we've all got egos. There's always going to be an element of a battle in your day. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the human experience. So anyway, this guy comes back into my life, bearing in mind he hasn't got kids and he hasn't got a partner, or he's and like not married. The reason I emphasize that, he starts making comments, and I used to think they were judge because of my ego, judgmental of how I am as a dad. I used to think, how dare you? You haven't got kids, you have no idea. And then he'd be saying, but the things he'd be saying, thankfully, my soul was listening, because the reason it pissed me off so much is because I knew he was right. Same with comments he made as me being a husband. So as much as I battled it and had to battle my ego, the fact that I used to teach this guy and I used to manage this guy, I realized I needed him as my coach. And that was the best decision I ever made, because he became my coach and he held up a mirror for me to really look at myself. And it was on that journey, at the same time, I was working now with a guy from Tampa Bay, Florida. Wonderful human being. Harold Williams, his name was, and he was actually quite a renowned poet, part of the United States of America Foundation of Poets. He was an amazing guy, and he'd been told he only had a couple of weeks left to live when I started working with him. He had a huge tumor on his neck, and anyway, so there's a relevance to him and Harry. So imagine Harold uh, Williams in America, my client, Harry Thomas in England, my coach, right, at the same time. So as I'm working with Harold, Harold's another angel like Debbie before. Harold is this just oh, just a wonderful human being, top-notch human being. So I'm learning, as I always do, from my client, and I've now got this coach. So I'm very much in this new state of self-awareness of, right, I'm learning. What am I learning? I'm learning about me. First time in ages I'm willing to look at me. And my coach kept saying to me, Harry kept saying to me, I know there's something that you're not telling me, and I don't know what it is. So I knew what it was. And he said, look, even if you're not going to tell me, he said, tell yourself, video yourself telling yourself what it is that you're holding back. So this one day I went to do the school run to pick up my son, and I left early. And my wife said, why are you leaving so early? And I made up some story. The reason I knew I was going to leave early is because I was going to park up somewhere and I was going to video myself telling myself about what happened to me as a kid, something I'd not done at this stage, at that stage, for 27 years. So nearly 3 decades, this had been buried really deep. And I remember the level of anxiety driving towards his school, knowing that, right, I'm going to park up somewhere. And I kept, no, I'm not going to like make excuses. I could park, no, I'm not going to park there. I could park there. It's funny again at the universe, where I ended up parking, because I nearly bottled it. Bottled it, by the way, means I nearly uh, uh, didn't do it through fear. I ended up parking near my son's school in a graveyard. So I was in this cemetery surrounded by all of this uh, death, which is back then what I used to class it as. And what a fitting place to then unburden myself, because it took me 3 attempts of pressing record and then stopping. Then on the third attempt, I recounted my story. And once I started, it was amazing how everything started coming back. Like literally, almost like my soul had a reel that it was throwing it all up as if, right, this might be the only opportunity we get. Throwing every memory, and I just started crying. I mean, I really cried, and even now recounting this, my whole body's tingling in a good way, because I hadn't ever. It's one of them moments in life. If anyone's watching this, where you can remember where you've had a moment of self-reflection that has really hit you in the face, hit you in the soul. And I just remember it all coming, the stuff that I couldn't even believe I remembered that was coming out, was coming out, was coming out. And I always describe it now when I talk about this to people. It was almost like that cemetery and all that wonderful energy from all them people that was in that cemetery took that trauma out of me, and it's just like sort of spread out as ashes all over that cemetery to be laid to rest. Because as soon as I'd done it, 27 years of self-persecution, judgment, embarrassment, and all the other nasty little comments my mind would make about what had happened to me, it was gone. Like in an instant. In fact, no, it wasn't gone. What was gone was how I was looking at it. All of a sudden, I looked at it from a different perspective of, you've got nothing to be ashamed of. It wasn't your fault. In fact, the last 27 years, and this was a big one for me, and this is a big part of my coaching practice. The last 27 years, it wasn't even the abuser's fault. That abuse stopped with him then. He probably has never, maybe as from time to time, he's probably never really put much energy into thinking about me over that course of time. So that was me. I, for 27 years, practiced at being an abusee. That was on me. And I realized that with no judgment, no shame, like logic. Oh my God, I don't need to do that anymore. So that allowed me to let go. And at the same point, the reason I brought up my angel in America, Harold Williams, is something happened with him, which for those that get to watch this video, if we get to meet, I'll tell you that story. I'm not going to tell you it in this video. Something happened at the same time. It's funny how the universe puts it all together that enabled me also to grieve my son that I lost, that I couldn't cry over, hadn't cried over at that point for 7 years. So it all happened at once. And that was my moment. And since that moment, life has just been more wonderful, more wondrous. I'm a better dad, I'm a better husband, I'm a better son, I'm a better friend, I'm a better coach, because I'm continuously becoming a better me all the time. So that is, in just under 35 minutes, a chunk of my backstory, which gives you enough, I hope, for you to understand that there's trust now, because I've entrusted you with something that I didn't entrust even myself to look at, let alone my family members, for nearly 3 decades. Now you know. And I've given you that because if you do work with me, if you do speak with me, if we do energy exchange, you know who I am and my story. And I'd love to know more about yours. Thank you so much for listening. There's more to the tale. However, that is more than enough as a starting point. There's a foundational point, foundations of everything. So, just in case no one else has told you this today, please know that you're a one-off. There's never been another one of you before. There's not another one of you now, and there will never be another one of you again. That is a fact. You are unique. You are special. Only you can be the best version of you, and you are enough in all ways for always. Sending you good health, love, kindness, and happiness.